Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 118. With our book today, well, it's not really a book, it's our play today that continues our journey through the works of Shakespeare in August. Now, you know, Shakespeare being Shakespeare, most folks reading Shakespeare in high school struggle with Shakespeare's plays, and we've mentioned this previously on other podcasts. Struggle because of the language, struggle because of the themes, but Shakespeare's ideas are eternal and are almost universal, and they sit along with the Bible, along with Greek and Roman myths, at the basis of Western civilization. They are indeed, I would say, one of the building blocks of Western civilization. And there is no greater a play, or maybe no more famous a play, than the one we are going to read today. This play mixes fairies, it mixes dream imagery, it mixes symbolism, but it also mixes good jokes, and it mixes sort of slapsticky humor with higher ideals. And it sets as a template, or it stands as a template for the furtherance of entertainment in a, well, and not only entertainment, but also cultural transmission of knowledge for individuals from generation to generation. Just like all of Shakespeare's plays, they'll still be performing this one long after we are all gone. Today, we are going to look at, well, what do you do with a newly captured Amazon? How do you get people to fall in love and get married? And what happens when you fall asleep or perchance to dream? Today, we are going to read A Midsummer Night's Dream by, of course, William Shakespeare. And we are joined today on the podcast by our, I guess I could say, semi-regular guest co-host now.
Right.
There we go, semi-regular. Libby Unger. How are you doing, Libby?
I'm terrific. Great to see you, Hassan.
Awesome. Coming off of our last episode that we did together, where we looked at some really, really hard stuff, right? With totalitarianism and with language. And we're going to move to something lighter with this play, something not as heavy. And so we're hoping to pull some critical analysis out of this. And of course, we're going to read it in the original language. And the version that I have, and you can get this online, is the Folger Shakespeare Library version. Oh, it's the same version that Libby has right there. There you go, of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular play, and I would, of course, recommend this to anyone reading or trying to consume Shakespeare, is you can get an audio version of this as well on Audible. And so I would recommend both reading and listening to A Midsummer Night's Dream in concert with each other. This will help you as a reader understand what's actually going on in the play and understand the characters, and it'll feel more cinematic. And this play does indeed feel cinematic. when you read it. But I want to open up with Act 1, Scene 1 of A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. Enter Theseus, Hippolyta, and Philostrate with others. Theseus. Now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. 4 happy days bring in another moon, but, oh, methinks how slow this moon wanes. She lingers my desires like a stepdame or a dowager, long withering out a young man's revenue. Hippolyta. 4 days will quickly steep themselves in night. 4 nights will quickly dream away the time. And then the moon, like to a silver bow, new bent in heaven, shall behold the night of our solemnities. Theseus. Go, Philostrate, stir up the Athenian youth to merriments, awake the pert and nimble spirit of mirth, turn melancholy forth to funerals. The pale companion is not for our pomp. Philostrate, of course, exits. Hippolyta, I wooed thee with my sword, and I won thy love during doing the injuries. But I will wed thee in another key, with pomp, with triumph, and with reveling. Enter Aegeus and his daughter Hermia, and Lysander, and Demetrius. Aegeus, happy be Theseus, our renowned duke. Theseus, thanks, good Aegeus. What's the news with thee? Aegeus, full of vexation come I with complaint against my child, my daughter Hermia. Stand forth, Demetrius, my noble lord. This man hath my consent to marry her. Stand forth, Lysander, and be my gracious duke. This man hath bewitched the bosom of my child. Thou, Lysander, thou hast given her runs and interchanged love tokens with my child. Thou hast by moonlight at her window sung with feigning voice verses of feigning love, and stolen the impression of her fantasy with bracelets of thy hair, rings, gauds, conceits, knacks, trifles, nosegays, sweetmeats, messengers of strong prevailment in unhardened youth. With cunning hast thou filched my daughter's heart, turned her obedience, which is due to me, to stubborn harshness. And my gracious duke, be it so, she will not hear before your grace consent to marry with Demetrius. I beg the ancient privilege of Athens. As she is mine, I may dispose of her, which shall be either to this gentleman or to her death, according to our law, immediately provided in that case. Theseus, what say you, Hermia? Be advised, fair maid, to you your father should be as a god, one that composed your beauties, yea, and one to whom you are but as form in wax, by him imprinted and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it. Demetrius is a worthy gentleman. I'm going to pause right there because that sort of sets up the ideas that begin to really drive A Midsummer Night's Dream, where Theseus, the Duke of Athens, is planning the festivities of his upcoming wedding to the newly captured Amazon, Hippolyta. And Aegeus arrives with his daughter Hermia and her 2 suitors, Lysander, the man she wants to marry, and Demetrius, the man her father wants her to marry. Aegeus demands that Theseus enforce Athenian law upon Hermia and execute her if she refuses to marry Demetrius. Now, this is an interesting dynamic that is being set up right at the beginning of Shakespeare's play here, because it is a 16th century dynamic. That's number one. Number two, it's a dynamic that that may ring a little bit false to us, considering that we live in the 21st century and we live in a world where women can choose who they marry. We can even have women run for president in our country. And so the challenges that immediately beset us or set before us in wrapping our arms around this play are challenges partially of culture, but also partially of the passage of about 500 years in between the writing of this play and, of course, the times in which we live now. All of this is very interesting because we are in August in an election year in the United States of America, and a woman is running for president on a major presidential platform ticket. And so issues, or maybe not issues, but the concerns and the challenges that women face are ones that we have consumed ourselves with in our culture, I would say over the last 50 or 60 years, with increasing urgency and increasing pitch. Now, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, and that's not what we're going to discuss here today. But my question for Libby, just to open up the door here, is first off, what did you think of A Midsummer Night's Dream when you read it? What's your initial impression of the story and of the play? And then this first act that sort of sets up this dichotomy between the father and the daughter and this challenge of power. What do you think about that between as it's framed up between men and women?
Well, first of all, I loved the play. I actually remember it fondly from grade school. We did 3 Shakespeare plays, and I don't remember if it was one a year, from 3rd to 5th grade, but Taming of the Shrew, Macbeth, and finally A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I think I was Puck, or maybe I wanted to be Puck. It was way too long ago, but I love the Puck character and how like mischievous he was. But just the silliness of Bottom name, the ass, named Bottom.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun, and you kicked this podcast off with reference to some of our prior conversations, which the road to serfdom and King Lear, and we've had some heavy conversations that seem very relevant.
Mm-hmm.
They rhyme with our time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was just delightful to read something light.
Mm-hmm.
But also, your final question was about the father and daughter dynamics. I mean, the culture. Let's be unburdened by what has been. Like that. All I can think of right now is like, Dad, I don't want to do what you want me to do. Let's
Mm-hmm.
be unburdened by what has been. Um, and so there's always going to be, that fight or the tension between like parent and child and father and daughter, especially 500 plus years ago. Now, I would say something that it's probably blasphemous by many, but I've seen marriage predominantly being occurring for economic reasons, and for many generations and cycles it was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do, as I get older, see that it's about much more than that, but there was a necessity around preserving and carrying forward familial safety that comes with economics and prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
But the crime for not doing what one's father says is death. Holy cow! That's a little extreme. But it just goes to show how we evolve over time from a societal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of a big believer that we're always moving up and to the right,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that we're always progressing towards thriving,
Mm-hmm.
a civilization that's thriving across all classes and genders and types. But that tension between the current generation and the previous generation is timeless. It
Mm-hmm.
just manifests differently. And the consequences were a bit more extreme back then. But if you think about it being an economic relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and you choose to marry someone other than who I'm supportive of,
Mm-hmm.
um, you don't trust them with your prosperity. That could be the end of a family and a line.
Mm-hmm.
So can I maybe rationalize it, for a different time? Perhaps. Do I support
Right.
it? Oh, but yeah.
Well, it seems as though, and this is one of the challenges with Shakespeare, right? So he's pulling from previous references to myths and previous myths, even that people of his time would have known. So, pulling from the Western medieval slash getting into the Renaissance understanding of um Greek and Roman myth, right? What is an Amazon? What does that word even mean, right? Who is Demetrius? Who was Hermia? Who is Lysander? what do these mean? Because everything has a double meaning in Shakespeare, or
Right.
sometimes even a triple meaning. We talked about this even with when we talked about not Macbeth, but King Lear, right? Um, these double and triple meanings, you know, and the character of Theseus from Greek mythology, and sort of what everybody would have known what those meant. And this is the hothouse of Shakespeare. This is why Shakespeare. This is why people in modern times struggle with reading Shakespeare sometimes, because those references to
Mm-hmm.
those things everybody would have known in the 15th century, or sorry, not 16th century, would have just known. We don't know those references anymore. They've dropped out of
Right.
our culture, right? And it's not that we don't know who the Greek and Roman gods were. It's the depth of that knowledge just isn't there, and the depth of that connection isn't there. So Shakespeare's writing, or writing A Midsummer Night's Dream, as a light, poetic comedy. I believe an early critic of of Shakespeare's play in the 17th century. Samuel Pepys found the play to be, quote unquote, the most insipid, ridiculous play that I ever saw in my life, unquote. Um, Even though he did admit that it had, quote, some good dancing, some handsome women, which was all to my pleasure. Okay. Um, this is because it was a piece of popular entertainment. It wasn't meant to be sort of like Hamlet, where it's really a sort of a cultural commentary on power, or even Macbeth, right? Or even Richard III, where he's doing historical, you know, his historical genre. Here he's doing comedy. And so comedy is supposed to be light. It's supposed to have references. It's supposed to have double entendres. It's supposed to have all these different kinds of meanings. We lose all of that 500 years later, because we just lost the references. They just dropped out of our culture. And so we take the raw thing, right? That raw relationship between a father and a daughter, or that raw fact of a decision, and we pull that forward because that resonates across time. But the other context around that, we sort of struggle with. Which you talked about marriage being a contractual act. I believe it was C.S. Lewis who infamously said, or it might have been G.K. Chesterton. This was one of those theologians, writing in the 20th century, said that you know uh, everything was fine. I might be paraphrasing this poorly, but everything was fine with marriage until love entered into the fray in like the 19th century.
Completely, right? Yeah.
You know, everything was working out really well. Um, but marriage as a economic arrangement, we still don't even really like to talk about that in our culture. Even in modern times, I mean, yeah, we live in an era where, and the myth of the 50% divorce rate is truly a myth. Like if people, or not, I should say myth, you can question that number, right? Is there a 50% divorce rate among people who are of a certain economic strata and who don't have ideals that bind them together? For sure, absolutely. That go beyond love, absolutely. The divorce rate's above 50%. But when people have ideals that bind them together, in particular religion, or have some other external commitment that binds them together that's not material, divorce rates are not 50%. Divorce rates are way the hell lower than that. It's more like 10%, 15%. It's way down. But we don't talk about the stuff that binds people together in marriage. And this play is a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about that if you want to grasp onto some of that, because they are trying to bind each other together. They're trying to get married, and it's not just and there's 5 interlocking sort of ideas going on here. We're going to get into some of those too. Yeah.
There's so many different themes, or plots and subplots that all, come into play with that.
Well, and even when Aegeus is talking about how Lysander has sort of interchanged love tokens with his child, right? He says, thou hast by moonlight at her window sung, right? With feigning voice versus feigning of love, and stolen the impression of her fantasy with, and then this is objects that he's brought to his daughter, right? Bracelets of your hair, rings, gauds, conceits. I love that. Knacks, trifles, nosegays. Nosegays were flowers. Sweetmeats. By the way, if you don't know what sweetmeats are, go look them up. I'm not going to tell you on the podcast. Just go. I don't want to ruin the surprise. Messengers of strong prevailment. And that's how he sums it up. The father, messengers of strong prevailment and unhardened youth. Look, I have 2 daughters. If some dude's sniffing around doing all that, I'm going to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I am. And one of my daughters is 19. The other one is 14. I'm going to have an opinion if the 19-year-old has a boyfriend sniffing around. I'm going to have an opinion about that kid. Now, back in the day, my opinion would have probably held more weight than it does currently.
Right.
But my opinion still does hold weight. And so there's these kinds of dynamics that are happening here where Shakespeare's setting the table for what will happen later on. I kind of derailed you on that whole like marriage as a multiple layered thing sort of a little bit.
Yeah, no.
Oh, it's like we can talk about courtship too.
I think where I go with more of this is the whole play is about kind of balancing the rational and the irrational.
Yeah.
Or the dream state with the grounded present state.
Mm-hmm.
And at an extreme, you can be told to love something and you'll love the next thing that you'll see. So I bring that forth to modern day. And I can't help but bring it forth to modern day when we're told, you're told over and over again what right should be by all different institutions. And so then you see what right is and bad is without questioning what is right and bad. So when I think of, you in the forest and the sleeping woman is has the flowers dappled all over her, and the first person she looks at she falls in love with, and regardless of the fact that he's literally a pompous ass, it's an actor with a donkey head. It's this deeper meaning around, we're told to love what we see next without questioning it. And I'm probably putting more depth into this play and meaning, but it is really interesting. What do we really love what we think we're seeing? To the at the beginning with your Hermione loving Lysander. Is that love or lust? Is it real? We saw Romeo and Juliet, kind of these same themes around, love and willing to die for your love. But, what is just lust of youth? I mean, being told what you should love versus like something that's going to be grounding and, where that makes sense on a rational basis through the rest of your life. And since on a rational basis doesn't mean money, it could mean that you have similar values. It could mean that you have similar values around children, around how to have a household, how to make and provide for your family. So the whole play for me is about the balancing of objective reality with subjective reality.
Yeah, I would agree
and
with
subjective
that.
being the dreams state,
right, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. I want to talk about these
faith.
I'm going to talk about the fairies. I want to go to Oberon and Titania and the fairies and the pygmies and the ass and Puck and all that. Yeah, I want to get into all this. So courtship. Okay, last question. So courtship here. That's also a key theme in A Midsummer Night's Dream. So you can court somebody either by knocking them out and making them love you, which apparently it's extreme. These days we would call it slipping or a Mickey. And we would say that's not appropriate, and we're going to send you to jail.
Sure.
um, Back in the day, apparently, however, the use of flower juice, like that was kind of fine. Like nobody really objected to that, apparently. Um, and there is an idea in here that is floating through A Midsummer Night's Dream. And one of those things we don't talk about, that courtship, the act of courtship itself at a psychological level is a drug that converts, like you said, lust to love, right? But there's also a sub idea in here that if you can't do the courtship thing well, we've kind of got these other things we can kind of give you. Um, and that just goes to prove an assertion that I've made even to my kids, as they have grown up, that drugs have existed. And my 7-year-old was asking me about this the other day. Drugs have existed for, this is what human beings do. We find things that make us feel good, and we put them in our bodies. And some of them have actually, most all of them have terrible damage. And particularly if you misuse them, or don't use them in the correct way. And I think that's a sub idea, a second order idea that's sort of running through this play, that I think people of that time watching it would have connected into immediately. And it's kind of interesting to me. I know Midsummer Night's Dream has been adapted in many different sorts of ways, but I don't know how heavily in adaptation that has been referenced or even sort of leaned on. I know that there's there's a UK production of A Midsummer Night's Dream that's like set in an alternative future, that was shot a few years ago. And I know that variations of this story, most recently in 2016 on BBC One, have done like TV and film adaptations of this. And I got to admit, I've never seen a TV adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream, nor have I ever seen any of the film ones, which is sort of a blind spot in my like reality. And so I don't know how much, reference. I've seen cartoon versions, and we'll talk about cartoons here in a minute. I've seen cartoon versions of this, but I've never seen a live action version of it. So I don't know. I think Shakespeare would lean in on something here that's also another human universal. It's that idea of courtship as a drug, because you know how good you feel when like somebody who you really like and someone who really likes you is like chasing you around the block. Everybody knows how good that feels.
Yeah, I mean, love is, I just wrote down, love is a dangerous drug when sought in its extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think, when love is the end state, or what you're articulating as love, which is just oxytocin, when sought in the extreme, can be dangerous. And that's when we see infidelity and, and all those kind of things come through, or unhealthy relationships, when you're the one you're seeking is no longer interested in you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting concept around it being a drug, and kind of why you need to balance it with balance the oxytocin lust thing with the other values that really matter
Right.
in life, that
Right.
have long sustained positive impact on your life, versus just momentarily pops.
Momentarily pops. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Um,
Okay.
let's talk about sleep and trickery, because we referenced this a couple of times. Let's talk about we talk about the drugs piece, but I want to talk about these let's talk about these fairies. So I'm going to skip here a little bit. I'm going to go to Act 2, Scene 1, and I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly. And there's interlocking ideas in A Midsummer Night's Dream, because it's not just enough to sort of do a play. It wasn't enough for Shakespeare to write a play that was merely about courtship and romance and marriage. He'd already kind of done that with Romeo and Juliet, which was a tragedy, and so he was looking to do something different here with comedy, and the challenge, of course, of a writer, which is also something that we talk about on this podcast. The critical challenge of writing is how do you introduce a new element to a piece of writing without it being jarring for the audience. And so he decided he was going to introduce fairies, and specifically Oberon and Titania, king and queen of the fairies. So we're going to look at Act 2, Scene 1. And we're going to read through sort of some dialogue here around, well, around how do you make somebody fall in love. All right, Robin. I'm sorry, Act 2, Scene 1 of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Enter a fairy at one door, and Robin Goodfellow at another. Robin, how now, spirit? Whither wander you? Fairy, over hill, over dale, through bush, through briar, over park, over pale, through flood, through fire. I do wander everywhere, swifter than the moon's sphere. And I serve the fairy queen to do her orbs upon the green. The cowslips tall her pensioners be, and their gold coats spots you see. Those be rubies, fairy favors. In those freckles live their savors. I must go seek some dewdrops here, and hang a pearl in every cowslip's ear. Farewell, thou lob of spirits. I'll be gone. Our queen and all her elves come here anon. Robin, the king doth keep his revels here tonight. Take heed, the queen, go not within his sight. For Oberon is passing fell in wrath, because that she, as her attendant, hath a lovely boy stolen from an Indian king. She never had so sweet a changeling. And jealous Oberon would have the child, knight of his train, to trace the forests wild. But she perforce withholds the loved boy, crowns him with flowers, and makes him all her joy. And now they never meet in grove or green, by fountain clear or spangled starlight sheen, but they do square, that all their elves for fear creep into acorn cups and hide them there. Fairy, either I mistake your shape in making quite, or else you are that shrewd and knavish sprite called Robin Goodfellow. Are not you he that frights the maidens of the villagery, skim milk, and sometimes labor in the queern, and bootless make the breathless huswife churn, and sometime make the drink to bear no barm, mislead night wanderers, laughing at their harm? Those that hobgoblin call you and sweet puck, you do their work, and they shall have good luck. Are you not he? Robin, thou speakest aright. I am that merry wanderer of the night. I jest to Oberon and make him smile, when I a fat and bean-fed horse beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal. And sometimes I lurk in a gossip's bowl, in very likeness of a roasted crab, and when she drinks against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale. The wisest aunt telling the saddest tale, sometimes for 3-foot stool mistaketh me, then slip I from her bum, down topples she, and Taylor cries and falls into a cough. And then the whole choir hold their hips and laugh, and waxen in their mirth and knees, and swear, and merrier hour was never wasted there. My room, fairy, here comes Oberon. Fairy, and here my mistress. Would that he were gone. Enter Oberon, king of the fairies, at one door with his train, and Titania, the queen, at another with hers. Or Titania, not Tatiana. Titania, the queen, at another with hers. Oberon, ill met by moonlight, proud Titania. Titania, what, jealous Oberon? Fairy, skip hence. I have forsworn his bed and company. Oberon, tarry, rash woman. Am not I thy lord? Titania, then I must be thy lady. But I know when thou hast stolen away from fairyland, and in the shape of Corin sat all day playing on pipes of corn and versing love to amorous Philidia, why art thou here, come from the farthest steep of India, but that, forsooth, the bouncing Amazon, your buskined mistress and your warrior love, to Theseus must be wedded, and you come to give her there bed joy and prosperity? Oberon, how canst thou, thus for shame, Titania, glance at my credit with Hippolyta, knowing I know thy love to Theseus? Didst thou not lead him through the glimmering night from Perigonu, whom he ravished, and make him with fair Aegilius break his faith with Adrian and Antiopa? Titania, these are forgeries of jealousy. And never since the middle summer spring met we on hill and dale or forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind. But with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore the winds, piping to us in vain, and as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which, falling in the land, hath every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents. The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain, the ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted, ere his youth attained a beard. The fold stands empty in the drowned field, and kraals are fatted with murrain flock. The nine men's moors is filled with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green for lack of tread are undistinguishable. Human mortals want their winter here. No night is now with him or carol blessed. Therefore the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, that rheumatic diseases do abound. And thorough this distemperature we see the seasons alter. Hoary-headed frosts fall in fresh lap of the crimson rose, and old Hymes, thin and icy crown, and odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds, is, as in mockery, set. Spring, the summer, the chilling autumn, angry winter, change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world by their increase now knows not which is which. And the same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension. We are their parents and original. Titania has become unburdened by what has been.
Oh, it's so hard to resist.
It's just right there. It's so right there. So let's see. In Act 2, Scene 1, what do we got here? What are we working with? So, sort of a subplot, right, in A Midsummer Night's Dream between these two fairies, the king and queen of fairies, quarreling over the possession of, as was stated at the beginning of Scene 1, a young Indian boy. Oberon, of course, orders Puck in this scene later on to obtain a special flower that makes people fall in love with the next creature they see. Now, Oberon wants to use this, of course, to make Titania fall in love with the beast and use her infatuation to get the Indian boy away from her. Demetrius, of course, comes in to the play at this point, pursued by Helena. And then when Robin returns, Oberon, who sympathizes with Helena's love, orders him to find the Athenian man, Demetrius, and apply some of the flower's magic nectar to his eyes. Magic nectar, sleeping, dreams, memory, trickery, mostly trickery is what's on display here. And of course, we see this in the character of Robin Goodfellow, a puckish fellow, such as it were, who is the one who obtains the special flower, right, and delivers it. Because, as he stated when he was speaking to the fairy, right at the beginning of Act 2, Scene 1, he is the one who is the merry wanderer of the night. He jests Oberon and makes him smile. He's the one who lurks in a gossip's bowl, right? And causes her to spill her ale, right? And of course, to spill information from her lips. He's the one who, when the wisest aunt is telling the saddest tale, is mistaken for a 3-foot stool and then causes her to fall down, which, by the way, everybody who was watching this play live back in the 16th century would have laughed when they would have seen this, because they would have gotten the reference immediately. And then so he's a court jester, such as it were. He's a comedian. He's weaving humor into his approach to the world, but he's also a servant of the king, which is something else that we don't talk about too much. And so let's kick off with that. So, comedy, right? Like, we talked a little bit on this podcast, in particular with Libby, a little bit about comedy. And I'm a big fan of folks like Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock and Jerry Seinfeld. And I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy in general, Mark Maron, because I think stand-up comedy is really hard. But I also think it's a form of trickery. It's it's taking something that we know is either tragic or heroic or dramatic and finding the funny twist in it. I remember infamously that the comedian Steve Harvey, back in the day, was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, how does he come up with his jokes? And Steve said, "You have to understand, every single time a tragedy happens, every comedian on the planet already has the joke. We just can't say it."
Yeah.
And humor is a means of trickery. Humor is a means of getting across an idea in a package that people will laugh and immediately accept. So, Libby, I know you said you like the role of Puck and you liked Puck there. What do you like about Puck? How is Puck a court jester? And oh, here's a leadership question for you. Do leaders need a court jester?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, leaders need court jesters. They need the truth tellers. And that's what comedians are. That's what the jesters are. They're the truth tellers. And they aren't always the most popular. When they turn the light on that which does not want the light turned on them. But when I think about what they're doing, is they're essentially knocking you out of your thought process and your thought patterns. And so they're forcing you to think differently about what you're observing than you currently are. And by breaking that thought pattern, and especially like in tragedies,
Mm-hmm.
you can have people who are on that hamster wheel of pain and victimology and sadness, and just that moment of light can break you out of that to laugh. And it's oversaid and it's trite, but light is what well, light is what makes the roaches scatter, but it
Yes.
does actually make the darkness go away.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I like about Puck, is he's not necessarily light,
Mm-hmm.
but the mischievousness, the playfulness, and bringing in the fun and levity into moments. That's what helps keep us all lighter, is bringing like levity into moments, and not taking life so seriously. I often say that life is too short to take seriously, and the older I get, the more I mean that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
life will go on, have some fun. So a good
Right.
little trickery, but
Well, there's also a little bit of it's interesting you mentioned he's thought of as being funny, but he's actually mischievous, right? The
yeah,
Puck character, or the character of Puck, Robin Goodfellow. Um, the one of the things that's interesting. So the comedian Bill Burr was actually being interviewed by Jerry Seinfeld on a comedian is in cars getting coffee, right? One time,
okay.
and this sticks out to me. Bill Burr goes, he says to Bill, he says to Jerry, um, "You're actually very angry, but like you hide it because you have like this lilt that goes up in your voice at the end of every joke, and so people forget how angry you actually are, and you're irritated about everything." But I
It's
hear it.
true.
Right. I hear it. But you hide it so well. And Jerry goes, "Oh no, yeah, you're completely correct. I'm angry about everything all the time." And then of course he laughs and Bill laughs. And Bill's like, "You made an entire career off of people not understanding that you're actually irritable about all of this." And this is the cut underneath comedy, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
just the joke on top. It's the the negative things underneath. So you got a little bit of this with folks like what's his name? Um oh gosh, stand-up comedians back in the 80s. Bill Hicks. Yes. So Bill Hicks, right? Bill Hicks, Mark Maron, those kinds of guys where like I watched Mark Maron come out one time.
But you know he's angry.
Oh yeah. Oh, but oh please. Yes, he's give me a break. And he comes out with this pile of like notebook papers and just puts
Yeah.
them down and, and just starts talking. And and um, so there's how does the jokester, and I don't want to pull it apart because it's comedy and it's gossamer and all that. I don't want to pull it too much apart, but is it okay to be angry? Not okay. Is it if you're the court jester and you're supposed to be pointing out that the emperor has no clothes? I'm mixing a bunch of metaphors here.
Yeah.
Is it okay to be angry about that? Is that fine?
No, it's actually kind of laughing at the truth, right? Like
Right.
that's what I think is so important is, is that sometimes we wake up to our own truths,
Right.
right? And yes, I'm angry, but I don't want to be, or
Right.
like I want to bring levity to it. Like I want to find the humor in that which I'm like getting irritated about. And that's what Seinfeld is always doing is yeah, he gets irritated, but he's finding levity in it.
Right.
I actually thought you were going to bring up Bill Burr and Bill Maher,
Oh,
and
well, yeah. I mean,
that was the best. Like Bill Burr was going after Bill Maher for his haughty elite intellectualism. And it was awesome, right? Like, because, Bill was, Maher was not apologizing and he thought, he
no,
wasn't finding any levity at all in his
no,
intellectualism. He's like, I
it was the
actually
most,
am superior to you.
it was the most, it was the most uncomfortable. So the what we're referencing,
It was.
if you go back and listen to oh gosh, I don't know. It's been released in the last 2 or 3 months. You can go find it on the internet. It's
Yeah.
Bill Maher's
Yeah.
episode of Club Random where he interviewed Bill Burr. And you're right. I was listening to this while I was mowing my front lawn, and I was like, oh my God, he didn't give him any room to breathe at all. And I don't think
None.
none. And I don't think Bill Maher's ever been dealt with like that before. It was kind of, but where's Bill going to go? It's his own show. Like, are you going to walk off your own show? Like, what are you going to do? So you're stuck there getting pushed into a corner by a guy who is not giving you any daylight. It kind of reminded me a little bit, and again, every episode I have to bring this up. It kind of
Yeah.
reminded me of rolling with a really good jiu-jitsu practitioner where you're just trying
Yeah.
stuff and it's just not working. And you're like, what the hell? I can't figure out this Rubik's Cube.
Yeah. Yeah. What I loved about it though is a few weeks later, because as you said, it was really uncomfortable. I was watching it go, oh boy, where is this one go? Oh boy, this is rough because Burr is not letting up, but he's
At
spot
all.
on and he's having fun with it. Yeah. But later, Maher said I was just playing with it. And I call BS on that. In the moment, I don't think he was playing with it, but later, I think he actually saw like
Yeah.
I was wearing no clothes, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
he could step away from it later and see like, oh, actually, Burr, he has probably a few points. I'm not going to admit to which ones, but I was rolling with it, and that's what. Like you may not be what good comedy will do. Like you like often we'll laugh. We
Mhm.
don't always know why,
Right.
but at like the discomfort and and those awful things that are said right after those funny things that are maybe very bleak when you say them, but they make you think after a sad moment.
Right.
um it makes you think. And so, bringing it back to like Oberon and Titania, like maybe he didn't want her to love the beast so he could control, the Indian boy. Maybe he just wanted to be loved again,
Well, and
and that's what happens.
well, in Titania, so let's not let Titania off the hook a little bit. She's like, listen, you're just jealous. Ah, ba da ba da. I'm gonna do what I want. I can't be told. I'm gonna do what I want. And when I read Titania's character, I'm reminded of the line from the Billy Joel song. Um, She's always a woman, right?
Okay.
She can't be convicted. She's earned her degree. And I'm like, that we don't we struggle in our Western culture currently. And I think probably we always have. But I think the struggle was less in previous times than it is now.
Pure optionality.
Right, exactly. Well, as you increase your optionality, the
Your
struggle
options.
increases,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we are not comfortable talking about women's egos. We're just not. We're not comfortable talking about that at
Because it's
all.
always the men, the women,
Right. Yeah.
we
And
are
I'm not
those
saying that
dumb
like
men,
well, and I'm not saying that like that men are as clean and pure as the wind-driven snow. Give me a break. Let's be real here. What
But
I'm saying is,
neither is. We're both human.
right, we're both humans,
But
and
yeah,
how that ego is going to. We talk a lot. I'll draw a parallel here. We will talk a lot about the problem or the challenge, and it is a problem of men and violence, like how men manifest anger through violence. That is a problem for sure. Partially, it has to do with how men are encultured, but also partially it has to do with testosterone and biological factors and a whole bunch of other things, right?
right.
I've raised two sons. Trust me, and I've raised two
Yeah.
daughters. Trust me, men and women are biologically different. In case the Olympic Committee is
Yes.
paying attention,
Understood.
just,
Yep.
just want to point that out. Okay, so men will manifest anger through. We will talk about that all day, but we will not address how women manifest their egos, particularly in leadership positions, and sort of where that winds up at, because we're caught in this current moment of well, to paraphrase from again, from to go back to the Billy Joel, right? She can't be convicted. She can't. You're done. You can't say anything. You just gotta let her go. Well, maybe I'd be okay with that if she weren't in a position of power where
Agreed.
just letting her go could have some back
Very
right
yeah.
deleterious consequences for me.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
don't want to have her mouth writing a check that I have to cash with my actions.
Exactly. Yep. That's a great way to put it. That's where we are.
And so Titania's got an ego. She wants to,
Yeah.
and of course she wants to manipulate Oberon a little bit, which we're seeing that sort of dynamic tension as well. And Oberon wants to manipulate her, and that's the manipulation that's happening between both of them. Again, just as in a love relationship or in a marriage. I'm not saying manipulation happens in marriage, although we would be fools to believe that it does not, like in any relationship. you
Well,
know,
every politics is everywhere.
right.
Not politics as in like governmental politics, but we're always positioning and influencing,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it be with your sibling, whether it be with your child, whether it be with your wife or your husband or boyfriend, girlfriend, like you're always positioning and posturing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about what is the intent,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the outcome. The stronger relationships are when is when we understand our impulses, but we don't act on them, because some of our limbic brain impulses are limbic brain driven and
Right.
about status and control and ego.
Right.
But once we understand that, then we don't give into it, and we can have a healthier discussion and relationship.
Well, what
But
happened? What happened to the idea of us overcoming our ego? Like, there seems to be absolutely no talk of that.
it's a really good question. I think there's a role for ego, but I think it's just tempered.
Mm-hmm.
Narcissism is all about ego, right?
Oh yeah.
Narcissism is all about being seen and validated no matter what,
Right.
because I'm worthy and I'm better, all of those things. But
Yeah.
um yeah, overcoming ego, I don't know. I could play devil's advocate that we don't want to overcome it, because then is the reverse just passivity
Right.
and not having positions and not wanting to, to bait or counter or, come to the, have critical conversations that help us come to a good solution. What this is probably going to be heretical, but I've seen in too many marriages and in too many relationships where it's a lot easier for the man to just not say anything than to deal with the woman who's controlling the the household relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And, you like, so
Well, okay,
oftentimes
so let me
I've observed, I don't want to debate that either.
right,
But it's a
right,
lot
right, right.
easier not to, but the consequences maybe aren't so great, right? Like,
Well, I
as you
think
said, the consequences of that is I don't, there's no checks that she's making me right, figuratively as a
right.
result of some of that.
Right.
But
Well, I think also it's so let me say this. I do think there is a lot of in marriages. I mean, I'm married. I hang around other
right,
married people. I spend a lot of my time hanging around other married people. I see a lot of other people's marriages. Um, there's a time to advance and there's a time to retreat. It's a
right,
dance, right?
right.
Now, if you're always retreating, that's a problem. If you're always advancing, that's also a problem. The challenge is figuring out, here's the biggest challenge, at least in my marriage and in other people's marriages that I've seen. The biggest challenge is because the biggest challenge is figuring out where the advance and where the retreat is and where the boundaries are on that, right? So
Yeah, I actually think this is, there's a bigger cultural thing here, is that we've had it's not feminism in a in the marriage. It's more what you were talking about in leadership in business and in
yeah,
leadership in politics in the country,
yeah,
is that we've gotten to a place where everyone's retreated
right,
to allow that voice to be, to allow the feminine voice to be dominant.
mm-hmm.
And it's now causing a lot of problems
Problems, yeah,
that could be lives and livelihood, because we haven't counterbalanced it with more masculine, necessary masculine voices and tones. And that's the balance between like ego and empathy. Are those the
right,
right things to care? But we do need the balance for the ecosystem and for society to survive. And so the so anyway,
no, I think you're right,
Tatiana here was over indexing on ego, right? And not
yeah,
being challenged. And Oberon, challenges her in a mischievous way, right?
right, exactly, right. And he's
Uh,
not going to go at her,
and
he's not
it
going to go
brings
at her
back,
directly,
but it brings back order.
right, right,
And ultimately
exactly,
at the
that's
end,
it.
find their love again, right?
Yes, that's it. Right. No, I think that's so in a Midsummer Night's Dream, that there's love brings chaos, right? Because it's a strong emotion, right? Or we can even say, let's frame it in modern terms. Lust brings chaos because it's a strong feeling, it's a strong emotion. Lust and love bring chaos. Okay. So how do you, and this is the problem maybe that Shakespeare is seeking to solve with A Midsummer Night's Dream, how do you counterbalance that? What are the forces that pull that back? And look, um, civilization is the price we pay for having a little bit of a reduction in our appetites. Um, and if we don't have, I mean, this is what I'll sometimes say this to my kids. I'll say, listen, and particularly if I'm having a conversation with another adult that they're bored by, particularly when they were younger, and they'd be angry and they'd be upset and they'd be like, whatever, and they'd throw a fit or whatever, and then I'd correct them, and then they'd be all mad or whatever. And I keep around having the conversation with the adult. And then when I'm done with the conversation with the adult, then we can, leave the venue, right?
Yeah,
And the other adult, of course, looks at me, usually that situation, looks at me and go, and kind of is appreciative of the fact, and you can see it behind their eyes, that I'm just going to keep the adult interaction going
yeah,
and finish it. We get to our natural
yeah,
conclusion. And then, right, because there's an order for things, right? That's bringing order to
right,
chaos, right? But then I'll turn around and tell my kids, I always tell them with feedback, and my oldest daughter in particular will tell you this, I'm building a civilization here. That's why I'm having the
right.
conversation. This is called civilization building. That's what you need to be participating in. And I'm role modeling this for you right now in this particular interaction. Now, My kids don't buy that until they're in their 20s.
Right.
But that's
Or
okay.
probably 30s.
30s, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
But that's okay because if you don't role model it, like what we're role modeling right now, and I see this in a lot of families, what we're role modeling is the adults, the Oberons and the Titanias subsuming or retreating themselves to the kids. And that's a misorder too. And kids are great, kids are wonderful, but quite frankly, kids need to be civilized. They do, right? So that they
Yeah.
can be around others, primarily so they can be around other kids without being sociopaths and narcissistic little knuckleheads, but also so that eventually they can grow up to be adults that can continue to advance the society,
Right.
which used to be something again that we know, and that Shakespeare is just dropping into the play because he knows that this is the thing that we're doing. You don't have to actually say it, but now we've reached a point in our culture where we have to say it out loud and encourage people to do it. And I find that to be fascinating. I find that to be very interesting. It's sort of that cultural evolution thing that's going on in real time. Um, One other point about Titania's um speech here in Act Two, Scene One, that I find very interesting. She's comparing Oberon's moods to seasons, and to seasonality and to seasonal shifts. So basically, she's saying, you're a stubborn moron, basically, whether it's spring, summer, winter, or fall.
Yeah.
and and this is very clever of Shakespeare to kind of tie this in, because it grabs this idea that, or it reinforces the idea of seasonality in the play, but it also reinforces the idea that goes back to, of course, the name of the play, a midsummer night's dream, not a fall, not a winter, not a spring. And this, of course, would have been one other area that would have resonated very strongly with his watchers, with his viewers of this play, because they were, they were what we would call now organic farm to table agricultural, generations of farm to table agricultural lifestyle. No industrialization, threshing with wooden tools, eating what they grew and what they could kill. They understood something that we've lost in our industrialized modern world, and now our service industry modern world, where we don't even touch our food. It's just we go to the grocery store and get it, or it's delivered to us via DoorDash. But he understood something that they also understood. So this is sometimes another reference that we, or perhaps another reference that we miss here in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay, cool. I want to turn the corner a little bit. I want to talk about cultural transmission via the most unlikely vehicle of all, um, Looney Tunes. Yes, I did say that correctly. I've been wanting to talk about Looney Tunes on this podcast for a little while, and I can't think of a better person to talk about it with than than Libby here. I'm a huge fan of Looney Tunes, and I'm going to actually sort of put the weight of that on well, on the remainder of Act Two, Scene One. So we're gonna go back to the book, or back to the play. Act Two, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Act Two, Scene One. We're gonna pick up where Oberon responds to Titania. So Oberon, do you amend it? Then it lies in you. Why should Titania cross her Oberon? But I do but beg a little changeling boy to be my henchman. Titania, set your heart at rest. The fairyland bides not a child of me. His mother was not a votress of my order, and in the spiced Indian air by night full often hath she gossiped by my side, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marked the embarked traders on the flood, when we have laughed to see the sails conceive and grow big-bellied with the wanton wind, which she, with pretty and with swimming gait, following, her womb enriched with my young squire, would imitate and sail upon the land to fetch me trifles and return again, as from a voyage rich with merchandise. But she, being mortal, of that boy did die, and for her sake do I rear up her boy, and for her sake I will not part with him. Oberon, how long within this wood intend you stay? Titania, perchance till after Theseus's wedding day. If you will patiently dance in our round and see our moonlight revels, go with us. If not, shun me, and I will spare your haunts. Oberon, give me that boy, and I will go with thee. Titania, not for thy fairy kingdom. Fairies away, we shall chide downright if I longer stay. Titania and her fairies exit. Oberon, well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury. My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest since once I sat upon a promontory and heard a mermaid on a dolphin's back, uttering such a dulcet and harmonious breath that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music. Robin, I remember. Oberon, that very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal throned by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see a young Cupid's fiery shaft quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votress passed on in maiden meditation, fancy-free. Yet marked I where the bolt of Cupid fell. It fell upon a little western flower, before milk white, now purple with love's wound, and maidens call it love and idleness. Fetch me that flower, the herb I showed thee once. The juice of it on sleeping eyelids laid will make man or woman madly dote upon the next live creature that it sees. Fetch me this herb, and be thou here again, ere the Leviathan can swim a league. Robin, I'll put on a girdle round about the earth in 40 minutes. He exits. Oberon, having once this juice, I'll watch Titania when she is asleep and drop the liquor of it in her eyes. The next thing then she, waking, looks upon, be it on lion, bear, or wolf, or bull, on meddling monkey, or on busy ape, she shall pursue it with the soul of love. And ere I take this charm off from her by sight, as I can take it with another herb, I'll make her render up her page to me. Who comes here? I am invisible. I will overhear their conference. Then Demetrius enters, followed by Helena. I'm going to leave that there for just a moment. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. When you read Shakespeare, you have to read it like this. Whether it's Macbeth or Hamlet or The Tempest or A Midsummer Night's Dream, you have to read it in sort of a lilt with a flow, and even when you hear it performed, it sounds like a John Barrymore performance from back in the day, or maybe a Gielgud performance, or these days, because no one knows those references, Patrick Stewart, right? Or Ian McKellen. There you go. I mean, imagine Patrick Stewart during Shakespeare, which, by the way, he did. By the way, he was a Shakespearean actor. So was Kelsey Grammer. He of Frasier Crane fame began his career performing Macbeth and Hamlet. And of course, when they read these lines, when they read these words, they put on this vaulted voice. And this is how we think about Shakespeare. We even read it in the voice in our heads. This is weird cultural transmission. I have no idea where it came from, that was the voice or that was the lilt you had to put on the words. But the cultural transmission of this is so good that in 1949, there was a Warner Brothers Looney Tunes short starring the Goofy Gophers, along with an unnamed dog, that was based on the stage and film actor John Barrymore, Patrick Stewart of his day. The title of this cartoon, if you're looking for it on Warner Brothers Max, is a ham in a roll. And the dog is tired of appearing in cartoons. It opens up with him tired of appearing in cartoons. And he goes home to study the words of Shakespeare. And of course, upon arriving back at home, the dog finds that his home has been invaded by the two goofy gophers who talk a little bit like this, and they talk very politely. And yes, dear, and yes, dear, and yes, dear. And so while he's reading Shakespeare and he's trying to improve himself, there's various gags that occur in this Looney Tunes cartoon, this Looney Tunes short, as he reads through A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, Julius Caesar, Richard III, and of course, Romeo and Juliet. And the gags in the cartoon rely on literal interpretations of lines from those plays. By the way, the running time of this cartoon, 6 minutes and 47 seconds, in case some of you are of short attention span theater and think that TikTok began all of that. It really didn't. This cartoon was directed by Robert McKimson, and of course, the great voice actor Mel Blanc, voice of the dog, the Gophers, and of course, read Hamlet, read Julius Caesar, read Richard III, and read Romeo and Juliet, all with the Shakespearean lilt, like John Barrymore. By the way, this is the brilliance of the cartoon Looney Tunes. Cultural transmission of high art via low comedy is something that is being goofed on in this episode, season 14, episode number 5, with the dog, and the dog himself even looks like John Barrymore, which is great. Shakespeare was trying to transmit culture as well, and so are we. We are in a cultural transmit. We're always trying to transmit culture. We're always trying to transmit civilization to each other. And whether it's a dog in a Looney Tunes short or a couple of gophers. By the way, he winds up at the end of the cartoon. The gophers defeat him, of course. And the gophers use a horse to kick the dog out of his house, after which the dog says, a horse, my kingdom for a horse, and goes back to the studio where he decides that he's going to go back to being a comedic actor. All in 6 minutes, all around the world, all 5 Shakespeare plays. Oh, and by the way, a little bit of classical music in there as well. And it is a cartoon that works so well as a method of cultural transmission that my 7-year-old, who knows nothing about Shakespeare at all, just got his dose of Shakespeare in about 6 minutes. I don't know what your familiarity is with Looney Tunes, Libby. I have no idea. But I watched a lot of Looney Tunes when I was a kid. And that's actually how I got into like opera, like Pagliacci. And,
Really?
oh yeah, from Bugs Bunny. I got into friggin' Pagliacci from Bugs Bunny. Because I was so curious as to what the music was and what the references were that I went back and researched it and tried to find it and figured this is how I got introduced to high art. One of the ways I got introduced to high art was through Warner Brothers' efforts at amusing me for 5 to 6 minutes.
Interesting.
It just bang, 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 bang. And the gags go so fast.
Yeah.
I have no idea what your experience. What is your experience with Looney Tunes? Do you have any experience with Looney Tunes at all?
That's
Were
all.
you a Looney Tunes kid?
That's all, folks. That's it.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, I was actually just looking it up as you were speaking about it to look at it, but yeah, no, I don't have a lot of memory. My My memory of cartoons on Saturday or Saturday entertainment was like Bill Cosby
Okay, yeah.
and Fat Albert or
Fat Albert, yes.
it's Fat Albert. Um, yeah, but I'm interested in watching it. I was reading the overview, but tell me more. This is fascinating.
Yeah, so
Is this
I
Saturday
am
morning cartoons for you?
yes.
Really?
So
Okay.
yeah, so I was when I watched so I watched Looney Tunes there were two different times you could watch Looney Tunes. So one time you could watch Looney Tunes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday afternoons, between like 2 and like 4, on the old WB network before it turned into like the UPN and then it turned into something else, or whatever. But the old WB network, so you could watch it then. But then you could also watch it on Saturday. You're right. And I watched it on Saturday on like ABC or something when I was living in the state that I was living in when I was a kid. I can't remember it doesn't matter. All I know is I would get up like 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, click it on, and you could watch Looney Tunes for like an hour. And so I'd watch all these cartoons, right? And I'd watch them in order, right? Well, I didn't know it was in order at the time, but I'd watch all these cartoons. And then you watch them repeatedly over and over and over again. And that's sort of how it kind of gets into your system.
Mhm.
So, you know, when the second generation of Looney Tunes cartoons, which came about in the 70s. So Looney Tunes was on, gosh, from the 30s until the 60s, until the late 60s. And at first it was Looney Tunes, and then it transitioned into Merry Melodies, which is a whole other different kind of thing. And of course, there are Looney Tunes cartoons that are racially and ethnically insensitive because a lot of them were made during World War II. But people were people were a lot more direct. Like there's even things I see in some of the cartoons now that they show that are sort of not now, but that were made between the 30s and the 60s that you couldn't make the gags they make today. Like you
Mhm.
couldn't have I'll give you an example. You couldn't have Bugs Bunny running around with thick lips kissing like people and then like doing sort of the like African American like exaggerated sort of caricature. You couldn't have that
Right.
as like a sight gag, right?
Right.
And it's a quick sight gag. Um and the way Looney Tunes is structured is there's an inciting event that occurs literally within the first minute.
Okay.
So you get the inciting event, you get the introduction. Usually with Looney Tunes, it'll tell you what the inciting event is going to be in the title. So for instance, for this one, a ham and a roll, like that works
Yes.
on so many different levels because a ham is an overactor, a roll ROLE, not ROLL, right? So
Okay.
you got like some messing around there, and that's the other brilliant thing with the guys on Looney Tunes, particularly the ones that were directed by what's his name, by Robert McKimson. So Robert McKimson directed a whole bunch of Looney Tunes. He was born in 1910 and he died in 1977. And he wrote and directed shorts with Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Foghorn Leghorn, Hippity Hopper, Speedy Gonzales, which by the way, you can't see Speedy Gonzales ones anymore. They're really hard to get. Tasmanian Devil. Um, and he was a brilliant animator and a brilliant writer and a brilliant illustrator. And so the animators and the illustrators and the directors would all work together. And if they wanted to throw a gag in, they just would. And so all these guys were highly literate. So like they knew
Yeah.
everything from like Shakespeare
Yeah.
all the way down to like vaudeville. And so they would put all of this in Looney Tunes. But they're not going to, obviously, because they're doing it for children, they're not going to just cram
Right.
everything in all at once. They're going to pace it really well. So you're going to have your inciting incident in the first minute, usually led in by your title sequence. Then you're going to have your music, and your music's going to run through the entire like the remaining 5 minutes of the cartoon, and it's going to be musical cues. So sometimes the sight gags will go off of musical cues. So like the Pagliacci one, the sight gags go off of the musical cues, but the music
Yeah.
also plays in the background while Bugs Bunny is also playing the music in the thing. And so it's working on like multiple levels. But you're sitting there as a kid, and all you know is your brain is just exploding with like sugar cereal,
Yeah.
and you're watching this. It's insane, and it's insane that you get to watch this. Then in the second minute or the second minute through the third minute into the fourth minute, you're going to have your gags, you're going to have your plot, you're going to have whatever Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck is getting into. Like one of the episodes we watched, one of the Looney Tunes episodes my son and I watched the other day. Oh gosh, I can't remember what the song was, but it's I don't remember what the name of the song is, but Daffy Duck is avoiding Porky Pig as the hunter, and Porky Pig tries to shoot him, and so of course he turns his butt around and he's got a target on his butt with like his dress that comes up. So
Yeah.
it's, cross-dressing Daffy Duck. And he going, and he like waves the dress around, and of course Porky Pig misses. And the bullet goes like a whole bunch of different places. And then Daffy Duck goes from having the bullseye on his butt with the dress to going back to another sight gag. Like literally it'll happen like that. And so it goes so fast. And you watch Looney Tunes, you watch the setup and the structure of it, and you watch the structure of the comedy, and you watch the kind of trickery they're pulling. In particular, like I said, McKimson along with Mel Blanc, and Mel Blanc would suggest gags because he could do anything verbally, and could do anything with sound. And then of course you only have, like I said, you only have 6 to 7 minutes. So they would do all these verbal layerings, and they come to a conclusion by the end, and then it goes whoop, and you're done.
Yeah.
And it's almost, when you're like a 9-year-old kid and you've never seen anything like that before, it's almost like you're getting hit by a freight train.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane. I love Looney Tunes.
That's so great. It's fascinating history here, and then the structure is really interesting too.
Well, and they did, I will say that Warner Brothers really allowed those animators like McKimson and others. Carl Stalling was another one. He did all the music. He was a genius with the music. But they would allow these guys to be the anti Walt Disney. They were literally like on the other side of Disney. So Disney was considered to be corporate and cultured, and they're going to do full-length movies. So this was during Looney Tunes was really popular during the time when Disney was doing Peter Pan and Snow White and Bambi and those Cinderella, the big sort of classical films that we think of as the Disney classics. On the cinematic end, Looney Tunes was owning television, and they were owning movie shorts. And so you would see, and that's how they started. You would see shorts in front of films first.
Yeah.
But then after that, they transitioned to TV, because TV was a much better medium for this.
Right.
Because you could do like 4 cartoons in a row in like an hour or in 20 minutes. Actually, in 20 minutes, you could do 4 cartoons in a row and everybody could get paid. And so they were the anti-Disney. As a matter of fact, almost to the point where they would have gags inside of the Looney Tunes cartoons that were anti-Disney gags, and they eventually had to drop those because Disney was like, "If you don't stop this, we're going to sue you."
Yeah.
Because Walt wasn't screwing around. But they knew of course, they knew all the Disney animators, and all the Disney animators knew them, and so they would exchange gags. It was a whole thing.
This is fascinating. I had no idea. I thought Looney Tunes was like part of Disney.
No, it was part of the what is considered to be the golden age of American animation, which is by the 30s through the 70s in this country, where you could literally build an entire media franchise off of cartoons for kids, because there was nothing on TV. Like, this is, and of course we live in the backwash of all of this. But in the 30s through the 70s, no one had any clue what to do with television.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you have this bandwidth. What do we put on this thing? So shows like my mom watched, because my mom was a classic boomer. All of her generation watched Howdy Doody, particularly the older members of her generation. Well, Howdy Doody was entirely a creation of some cereal company. So the cereal company came up with the show so they could sell cereal. Or the Tiffany network, right? The reason CBS is called the Tiffany network is because Tiffany Glass
You know that.
created CBS to sell more Tiffany glass. It's sort of an inverse for how we do media today. We don't do media like this today because of the internet. So no one is confused as to what to do with TikTok. Like no one's confused. Um, they may be putting ridiculous stuff on there, but no one's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
confused
Yeah.
as to
Yeah.
what to do once that bandwidth opens. Well, back in the day, it was different. It was like, okay, what do we do with this bandwidth? So you could put on Howdy Doody. You could put on a man with a puppet and then run that next to a bunch of cartoons and then sell some sugary breakfast cereal, and now you're done. And that was all thought of as being kid stuff.
Well, you do have mainstream like media that's not, wait, 80-90% funded by pharmaceuticals,
Right. You do
right?
have that. Yes, you
Yeah.
do have
But
that.
that's
Right.
like the modern equivalent.
Right. Well, in
This is
news,
fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
well, and news didn't really come along as a function of TV until, or not really, I would say come along, didn't really kick in as a function of television until the 50s and the 60s. So you had, what was his name? Oh, Brinkley and Hunt, right? Like those two guys, that really sort of kicked off the idea that television could be a medium for news as well as a medium for kids entertainment, as well as a medium for Westerns. Like the heyday of Westerns in the United States, particularly TV Westerns, was the 1950s and the 1960s. And so if you were a kid in the 50s, you could watch like Rawhide. Like people forget this. Clint Eastwood, his entire career started on Rawhide on television in the 1950s.
With the spaghetti western, I thought spaghetti westerns were in the theaters, right?
Yes, spaghetti westerns
Okay.
were in the theaters. Yes, and that
And the
was
reason that news wasn't that TV wasn't medium for news until 50s and 60s was because people didn't have TV. Most people didn't have
both
TVs in their homes, and most of it was through radio.
correct. It
Yeah.
was it was
Okay.
it was
That,
radio,
yeah.
then print, or print and then radio, depending
Yeah.
upon which market you were in. But I mean, you would live in a media market where you would be able to get, let's say you had five news, well, that's probably extensive, three newspapers, right,
Right.
in a city, right, like Chicago. You'd have three newspapers printing up news three times a day. So you'd have a morning edition, a midday edition, and an evening edition.
Forgot about that. I knew now that you say that, I knew they had morning and evening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow, how quickly times change and things change. Like I had some of that from a high level awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it is interesting getting into the cultural transmission discussion, how quickly the modalities change,
Oh yeah.
based on the advancements of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And Midsummer Night's Dream, was the ability to use comedy to share that with children. It reached all levels,
Right.
right? Like children through adults, the stories, and we all interpret it differently, and yeah, based on where we are in our own evolution, but it's
Mm-hmm.
fun for everyone, right?
All right.
And I think of that, like Pixar movies, the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's as much fun to go to a Pixar movie as an adult as it is as a kid.
Right.
And you think that the kids are gonna get like some of the innuendos, but they don't. They have
Yeah.
a whole nother level of understanding.
Right.
That's, yeah.
Well, I think of I was thinking the other day, well, maybe not the other day, but I was thinking I was thinking a while ago that it would be a real hoot. And this is a business idea that anybody can take as listening to this podcast, but it would be a real hoot to do 5 to 7 minute long animated shorts that are layered at that level that like Looney Tunes was layered at. But I don't know, number one, that you could do it. And I don't mean that the talent isn't there. And I don't mean that the gags aren't there. And I don't even mean that the comedy isn't there.
Hmm.
I mean, and probably the only place you'd be able to do it would be maybe Netflix or Hulu, maybe. But let's say Hulu. If you did a half hour, no, sorry, not a half hour. If you did 6 to 7 minute or 5 to 7 minute long animated comedic shorts, and you banged out like 100 of those in a week and distributed them on Hulu that were layered at the level that you got the layering back in the day of Looney Tunes with verbal gags, visual gags, wordplay, innuendo, speed of animation, music. I'm not saying the talent doesn't exist to do that. I believe the country is overflowing with people talented enough to do that. I think the thing that kills that idea is the subject matter that you would have to cover and the way you would have to do it.
Because too many feelings would get triggered.
Oh, and by the way, triggered so fast that they wouldn't even know they were triggered.
Yeah,
it goes so quickly. But case in point,
just know that something about it was upsetting.
Right. I don't know what upset me, but something. And then you would have people cut it and put it on the internet and slow it down and be like, oh, that's where it is, and you know them trying to. The closest you will get to something that's this good, as good as Looney Tunes, I think personally, and it's not for kids, which is really too bad, is Robot Chicken, the old Robot Chicken show on Cartoon Network back in the day. I think that's as close as you get, and that was claymation. And the only reason Seth Green and his crazy people were able to get away with that was because it was claymation. But it hit everything. It did. It hit everything with the verbal gags, the sight gags, the visual appeal.
I'm not a big animation person, but I see a lot of clips of South Park.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that kind of in the same realm? And as well as I also am not a what's the other one? Simpsons that everyone loves.
Oh, The Simpsons, Family Guy. Yeah. So I think so here's my honest. That's a great question, and my honest feedback on that, or my honest answer to that is Simpsons. Even the Flintstones, the Jetsons back in the 60s and 70s, and then Family Guy in the 90s, and then South Park in the late 90s all the way up to now. Those 5 cartoons would not exist without Looney Tunes.
Right.
So what they did was, all 5 of those cartoons, what they did was they took the concepts, the core concepts that were in Looney Tunes, and they did exactly what I just did. Like, they pulled it apart and they went, okay, I don't want to do this in a shorts context because it's too hard to sell advertising around this. Matt Groening, right? This is why he did The Simpsons as a half-hour show. And I think it was really to appeal to the advertiser television format. But now you see South Park doing movies that they're releasing on Paramount Plus. And, well, they're calling them movies, right? But they're like 90-minute long cartoons with gags and everything else. Well, it's the same concept as Looney Tunes. It's just we've expanded the franchise out because streaming requires different things than television-based advertising required. And so the metrics of who gets paid and how for what work have all shifted around. And I think that's the other challenge, other than just the people might get triggered part. The other challenge is, how do you pay all those people to produce, basically 5 to 7 minutes of short content?
That's the piece. And with AI, you might be able to do that. You have the different platforms between like YouTube Shorts and TikTok, neither of which I watch, but I know a lot of people do, and they're really popular. So it's more kind of the economics, because I don't know that it's as much of the triggering now with the Overton window opening as much as it has. And you do see, like South Park, being out there. But interesting. Thank you for sharing all this. This is really, really fun. I like learning.
Well, I'm a sucker for a gag. I'm a sucker for a well-designed gag. And I'm even more of a sucker for a gag that's well-designed and operates at multiple levels and is going to get me to think a little bit deeper past just the gag itself. So, like I'll watch Three Stooges like all day. I'll watch that kind of stuff all day, please. Um, and most men watch Three Stooges.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's more of a, I don't like to generalize, but I do think
Oh,
that's more of a male thing. Like, isn't what's his? I can't think of his name right now. The guy who was in Lethal Weapon,
oh, Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. He loves like the Three Stooges.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
dumb, whatever. Or a fart gag, right? Like
yeah,
like the fart gun in Despicable Me. Like
yeah.
I do think that's funny.
I
Um,
yeah, I find that stuff funny, but
but clever, visually clever, and it's really the visual clever
yeah,
thing that I'm looking for.
yeah,
Visual cleverness, but then you compile that in with music and gags and the words, the writing itself. When it's working on all of those levels, then you've got me. I mean, I'm suckered in. I'm in there. And if
so
it's not cheap,
so tell me how that relates back to Midsummer Night's Dream
so here's how this relates all back to the Midsummer Night's Dream.
for
The
you.
Midsummer Night's Dream. To your point, and actually you raised the point. Shakespeare was trying to transmit culture here, and I think cartoons um, do transmit culture. They are cultural transmission tools, right? Like memes. And this is why also I think you probably is the third reason why you probably couldn't get this to happen today, a Looney Tunes kind of thing to happen today, because we all live in meme culture now. I can transmit multiple ideas in a meme of, I don't know, pick your fame. I'll pick a famous meme here. The dog in the house that's on fire and he's drinking in one panel, and then the next panel it's like everything's fine. Right. He goes, oh, everything's fine here. Like you can send that meme to somebody these days and it operates at multiple levels
Yeah,
inside of their experience. And then
yeah,
they can send it to somebody else. They can send it.
yeah,
So now we're contextualizing, and that's what Looney Tunes did so brilliantly. And that, of course, what A Midsummer Night's Dream does, it contextualizes it for individuals so they can transmit it around. Now, in the time of Shakespeare, they were transmitting those ideas around via purely language because you couldn't take the actors with you and do the visuals. But in our time, we can take the visuals, we can take the words. It's going to be really interesting when memes can add musical clips to memes. That's going to be really interesting because there's going to be musical gags going on people's phones like all of the time. And you're already starting to see this with GIFs a little bit,
yeah.
animated GIFs. But when you can put music on top of that thing, I'll forget it. Like it's going to be ridiculous. And it's that multiple levels that we've layered in to our culture, how we transmit ideas. And it's become global, which is also awesome. And so a meme or an idea that works in a Western context can now work in a global context as well. The Midsummer Night's Dream kicks all of that off. That's my point with bringing up all of this. It kicks all of it off, and Looney Tunes and memes all tie into that at an amazing layered level, and doing it all with, like I said, low comedy and wordplay. So, which again, I appreciate.
Well,
I'm a
I
sucker for
definitely
wordplay.
appreciate a good meme and a good comedy, um, um, for sure.
Yes. All right, back to the book. We got around the corner here. I've rambled coherently about Looney Tunes. We might have to cut some of that. Uh,
No, no, no. Oh, don't. It's really good stuff.
back to the play, back to A Midsummer Night's Dream, the Folger Shakespeare Library version of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Um, so I'm going to go to Act 3. And in Act 3, Scene 2, we're going to pick up with the King of the Fairies. We're going to pick up with Oberon and Robin Goodfellow, where Puck, or Robin Goodfellow, reports to Oberon about Titania and Bottom, the guy with the ass on his head. And then Demetrius is going to enter, and Oberon's going to find out that, well, Puck screwed up. And so we're going to figure out what happens when you don't do what you are supposed to do. All right, back to the book, back to the play, back to A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 3, Scene 2. Enter Oberon, king of the fairies. Oberon, I wonder if Titania be awaked. Then what was it that next came into her eye, which she must dote on in extremity? Enter Robin Goodfellow. Here comes my messenger. How now, mad spirit? What night rule about this haunted grove? Robin, my mistress with a monster is in love, near to her close and consecrated bower, while she sleeps in her dull and sleeping hour. A crew of patches, rude mechanicals, that work for bread upon Athenian stalls, were met together to rehearse a play intended for great Theseus's nuptial day. The shallowest thick skin of that barren sort, who Pyramus presented in their sport, forsook his scene and entered in a break. When I did him at his advantage take, an ass knoll I fixed on his head, anon his Libby must be answered, and forth my mimic comes. When they him spy as wild geese that creeping fowler eye, or russet patched Chosmanian sort, rising and clawing at the gun's report, sever themselves and madly sweep the sky, so at his sight away his fellows fly. And at our stamp here, o'er and o'er, one falls, he murder cries, and help from Athens calls. Their senses thus weak, lost with their fears thus strong, made senseless things begin do them wrong. For briars and thorns at their apparel snatch, some leaves, some hats from yielders, all things catch. I led them on this distracted fear, and left sweet Pyramus translated there. When in that moment so it came to pass, Titania waked, and straightway loved an ass. Oberon, this falls out better than I could devise. But hast thou yet latched the Athenian's eyes with the love juice, just as I bid thee do? Robin, I took him sleeping, that is finished too, and the Athenian woman by his side, that when he waked, of force she must be eyed. Enter Demetrius and Hermia. Oberon, stand close. This is the same Athenian. Robin, this is the woman, but not this the man. And then they step aside, and then shenanigans. As Puck has to undo what he did. When we think about A Midsummer Night's Dream, when we think about Shakespeare's writing, and when we think about the power of how we can learn from this play as a leader, one of the big things that we have to take, I think, or one of the big things we have to take, not several, one of the big things we have to take from this play is the idea that there are things that are floating around that we cannot see, like love and lust, and they are powerful motivators for us. We've talked about motivators with Libby before, and how folks can be motivated by anger or motivated by pride, but people can also be motivated by love of what they are doing, love of a show, like I was just talking about Looney Tunes, or even love of another person. Love is a many splendored thing, to paraphrase again from Shakespeare, and it is a thing that motivates us. We also need to fall in love with our culture. We need to fall in love with the ways in which our culture is transmitted, whether that be through words or through visual means. And culture is another one of those things that we cannot see. Culture is the handmaid of civilization. It walks hand in hand. If civilization were male, culture would be female, and they walk hand in hand, creating all of us and turning us all into, well, productive human beings. And then, of course, for leaders, the last thing that they could take from A Midsummer Night's Dream is how to love a good gag, how to actually loosen up and laugh at things, because there's more things that are humorous than there are things that are unhumorous or that are tragic in this world. And even tragedy, by the way, can be turned sometimes into comedy, not to dismiss the depth of the tragedy, but actually to elevate people around it so that they can overcome it. As I round the corner here with Libby, what are your final thoughts on what leaders can grab from A Midsummer Night's Dream, one of your favorite Shakespeare plays?
Uh, Actually, it's all about having levity in levity in the workplace. Um, I I remember working very, very late nights. I was, a consultant with the Big Four for many years, and there was nothing funnier than Harvey balls at midnight. We all had, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses to go home to, but like there was nothing more funny at midnight than Harvey balls.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's always about bringing in, mischievousness or fun, and not taking, when you're in the grind,
Mm-hmm.
when you have tight deadlines, and and you believe passionately about what you're doing for your client, and you want your team to be successful, never forget to have fun. And you see that like with the special ops teams, those
Mm-hmm.
guys give each other a hard time every single day. It's constant ribbing and riffing, but that releases pressure and tension, and it's fun. Don't
Mm-hmm.
forget the art of fun, and stop taking things. I think results matter. A challenge matters. Like, don't, it's not about passivity and not
Mm-hmm.
caring, but it's about being able to have fun in the moment. Um, in all of life, and it's about love. It really is always about love, right?
Always about
Like,
love. If you
um,
love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I believe that's probably one of the more overused motivational phrases in entrepreneurship and in leadership, but it is true. Um, the challenge, of course, is in a world of multiple options, high optionality, or not even high optionality, a lot of options, a lot of choices. How do you find what you love? But once you find that thing, then you stick with it, right? And you got to have humor with it. You got to enjoy what you're doing. You got to be able to ramble for like 20 minutes about Looney Tunes and then make a
not
podcast.
enough people like the challenge, like find the love of solving new problems and the challenge that goes with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me is really about love, because it's about helping, wanting to elevate everyone, rise the ocean, if you raise the ocean, all boats will rise.
Mm-hmm.
Falling in love with solving problems, right?
Yes.
Like, that is fun. It's hard. That's why a
Yeah.
lot of people just sit back and and judge how someone solved a problem rather than do it. It's just like, no, fall in love with the challenge.
Right.
It's hard as HECK. But that's fun, and too many people have, I don't know what, I think they think love of work means art, or like, soft stuff that's been intellectualized as things that we should love. But
Mm-hmm.
but what's the end result? And being, and loving that whole process, and making sure that whole process works for everyone. um there's so many landmines that we always end up tripping on when you want to say, to let everyone be, make sure something works for everyone. It's, there's got to be tough love, and there's got to be,
Right.
we know what our constraints are, and we can't be everything to everyone. But, doing your darndest to create an environment for everyone to thrive based on their different, wants and needs and skills. But, providing, being able to make tough decisions that may be uncomfortable for folks,
Mm-hmm.
because that long term
Mm-hmm.
result is what matters, and where, and we're heading for. But too many people want the satisfaction today, and they're not willing to do the hard work, fall in love with the outcomes of hard work.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
How do we bring that back to Midsummer Night's Dream?
Yeah. I think we'll leave it there.
I think it's a combination for me. It's not over indexed. This is where balance always comes in, and thinking about
Mm-hmm.
how ecosystems require, dark and light. It requires good and bad, seriousness and fun,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also objective and subjective.
That's subjective.
So balancing an objective reality with an ephemeral one.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing the dreams to be, but not over-indexing too much on dream world or over-indexing too much on reality.
On reality.
No.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I agree with that. No. Well, once again, I would like to thank Libby Unger for coming on the podcast today. This is always a pleasure, as usual. And please go check out the older Shakespeare library version of A Midsummer Night's Dream and fall in love with Shakespeare.
It's a challenge.
It is a challenge, but it is a challenge that you will fall in love with. And with that, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.